Fight!
I'm now delighted to be joined online by Ryan Robbins, who played the one and only Raiden in Mortal Kombat Legacy, as we look in our next episode of Mortal Kombat, the franchise documentary. So far, we're speaking to cast members in Mortal Kombat, the original movie in 1995, Mortal Kombat does second movie Annihilation in 1997, and in the hugely successful web series Mortal Kombat Legacy. And Ryan, it was the latter one that you starred in, Mortal Kombat Legacy. You played the character Raiden. I suppose it was a unique twist angle on the sort of Raiden character. Quite inspiring, a different sort of take, trying to bring normality to a godlike sort of figure. And it was sort of a quirky sort of take in it. And was it a sort of enjoyable, or what was your immediate reaction when you saw the storyline?
Well, I loved it. I thought it was different. I thought it was unique to sort of remove Raiden from the realm we're sort of used to seeing him in, putting him in a more vulnerable place. Excuse me. It's not a character you expect to see vulnerability from, and it was also such a dark story. When you look at all the stories, there was an edge and a darkness that Kevin Tancharoen wanted, based on that first short film he did that kind of went viral out of nowhere. It was so dark and edgy, and I loved it. And it was the way the games were trending anyway. As we learned later, the games did start to get, even darker and more brutal and more exciting and more visceral. And so Kevin had this idea, and he wanted the Raiden storyline to sort of be the most brooding, I guess, if you will. And it was a blast. It was a real honor for me to tell you the truth. It was a privilege.
Yeah, and I suppose that sort of storyline with Raiden, I remember watching it myself, and just looking back in it, there was so much to try and take in and try and say what was going on here, to try and suss out the sort of plot, or suss out the sort of the team, or it took you a while to try and work out what was going on, while most other storylines came from the Mortal Kombat sort of universe. You could sort of figure them out, you could see the gist of the rivalry if you knew about it. But the Raiden one was sort of, where's this going? Where's his angle? How does Raiden get out of it? It sort of made you sort of keep watching to see how the story unfolded. It was sort of a unique sort of a take, because it stripped Raiden back to the bone, really, in terms of the fragileness of being a human, being a mortal, and obviously the idea that if you're anyway a bit different, you'll be ostracized, and in terms of a mental institution.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely had sort of social political connotation, especially at the time that we were shooting, and the idea to have Raiden connect with somebody was also really interesting. And in our story, he connected with Blue, and who was wonderfully played by Tracy Spiridakos, and that connection was interesting in showing a little bit of vulnerability from a Mortal Kombat character. I think was really, for me, it was really refreshing. It was really interesting to see a little bit of not weakness per se, but a little bit of vulnerability, and also some connection between Raiden and another character. Some actual care and concern was fun and fun to play. And it just, all that did, truthfully, was just drive the action, right? So then with that coming from his gut and his soul, it just drove the action with so much more sort of passion and vigor. And you made sense of the action in that story, because it was with a different purpose. It wasn't just a fight for the sake of fighting. It wasn't, clashing gods. There was just more to it. And I think some people maybe mistook it as like a take on an origin story, which it wasn't. It was more of a like what if story.
Yeah, and I suppose Ryan, Mortal Kombat is synonymous with martial arts. It's deep rooted a history in sort of martial arts. And I suppose when I was speaking to Dan Sotward, who played Kishi, his storyline was martial arts to the core, was forefrontal. Your sort of storyline, it was more intrigue, in depth. I suppose it was more about the story unfolding rather than the martial arts dominated episode. And what was that like in terms of yourself playing that actor, that vulnerability? Would you have liked to mix that more fight and more martial arts into it, or do you like the sort of backdrop to it?
Well, I think if you watch it, I mean, it's only what 12 minutes. There's a lot of martial arts in it. There's a lot of
Mm.
fighting in it, and you know, I love the fight scenes. You know,
Yeah.
choreographed by Larnell Stovall. There was just so much energy in those fight scenes. I mean, we had that one scene outside, which we ended up having to shoot in the snow, which was a really tricky fight scene because we were slipping and sliding, and
Mm.
you know, contact was made. You just couldn't avoid it, and I for me, having a martial arts background and getting to play a character who is a martial artist was super thrilling and exhilarating for me. And it's not something at the time. It wasn't something that a lot of people were aware that I could do, but you know, these guys knew it, and so they just threw me into the fire, and I got to go toe to toe with you know, some stunt legends, and we had an absolute blast. I mean, that fight scene in the hospital where I'm kicking people through walls and
Yeah.
throwing people through tables, and it was, man, we had a blast. It was so much fun.
And I suppose that Ryan, in terms of those sort of fight scenes and in terms of Raiden's special abilities and stuff like that, that all has to be choreography into the scenes from multiple angles, multiple takes, and the visual sort of effects and the computer animation. I suppose when you're fighting in that sort of element as Raiden, you don't really get to see that in terms of the final finished product. What was your initial reaction when you saw the digital animation and the computer sequences play back for you for the first time? Was it a bit of a surprise?
Well, the only digital stuff that we had in my episode, I think, was obviously at the end, and then just the electricity in the eyes, and that for me that's maybe my favorite shot of the show. For me, just as a fan of Mortal Kombat, when Raiden catches the taser,
Yeah.
and then pulls it in, and he absorbs all the energy, and then you just see his eyes turn. That for me was like, that was the moment for me for that. That's when you kind of look and go, oh. We just, you know, now he's Raiden, and then that's when I got to throw people through tables and through.
And I suppose Ryan, in terms of, I mentioned this to Dan, and he was saying that the Mortal Kombat Legacy, it was released, I think, around 2012, 2013, if memory serves me correct. It was probably a time just before Netflix came out, just before these sort of platforms came out, and you had those 2 seasons. But I imagine if he had come out maybe later on a platform like Netflix or something, that with the demand that is there, and he came out on a platform like that, there would have been a possibility for further seasons, I'd say. I just felt maybe towards the end, the latter of it in the second season, that maybe towards the end things were maybe tightened up in relation. Maybe you knew at that stage that there might be a third season to it, but definitely on a platform like Netflix, there was a possibility to extend that sort of franchise for maybe 4 or 5 seasons.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the intent originally was always to make a film, and for whatever reason, you know, this business is really tricky, and I don't know the whys and why nots of it, but between Warner Brothers and the creative team and whatnot, it just never gelled, and it never came together. And when they went to shoot the second season, I wasn't available, and but I loved the casting. I thought that I loved what they did with the second season, and we'd always talked about the film. We'd always talked about the film, and then it just kind of just went away, and now they've finally made the film, and I'm so curious, and I'll definitely be watching it.
Yeah, and I suppose in terms of, you mentioned now the film, and that's probably backboned on the recent success of the new computer game that has sold millions of copies worldwide, all across platform. I suppose the comic books as well are selling in their millions all over the world, and that has drove the demand, I suppose, for a new movie based on that. In terms of what she did in sort of Mortal Kombat Legacy, you probably advanced it from the original sort of movies back in 95 and 97, who probably, because of the nature of Mortal Kombat, they couldn't really go to that adult violent extent. Mortal Kombat Legacy geared more towards an adolescent sort of a crowd, and with more sort of teams and concept. I suppose now, given the success of Mortal Kombat Legacy, I suppose the new movie can follow on that platform that probably wasn't available in 95 and 97, when you look at the more Mortal Kombat was geared maybe more PG-ish in terms of its viewing.
Yeah, and I think it also has to do with at that time, and we're talking eight years ago now, to be able to release it online, you know, there were sort of less restrictions, and you could, you know, afford to be a little more violent. You could afford, and I mean, considering the time we released it too, there were millions and millions and millions of views for it, and I think that was a real pleasant surprise. No one was 100% sure what we were what to expect when we released it, other than we knew we had a lot of support and a lot of encouragement. And when it did get released, it was incredible. The response was incredible. I still, you know, 8 years later, I'll be on a film set and people will come up to me constantly like, "Oh my God, you were Raiden. This was amazing. I loved it." And it was just really cool to have that kind of impact. And yeah, like, it would have been, I would have loved to have continued doing it. And you're right, had we had something like a Netflix available to us at the time, who knows what could happen. It's even now, I think, like, you know, there's a series of shorts on Netflix called Love, Death, and Robots, and it's just a bunch of like 6 to 12 minute shorts all connected by a theme. And it's like, man, you could technically re-release Mortal Kombat on a streaming service right now. Why not? You know?
And I suppose Ryan, in terms of the Mortal Kombat, the time when you got cast for the character of Raiden, I suppose you probably, what the director wanted you to do was a different sort of take on the Raiden. So you obviously couldn't go back and look at the previous movies and look what Christopher Lambert did, and in terms like that, because it was completely sort of a different sort of take to it. So you had to come up with your own sort of concept and how you wanted to portray that Raiden character, that vulnerability in him, because almost in the Mortal Kombat movies, he's almost flawless. He's godlike. He's untouchable. He cannot do any sort of wrong. But you have to try and expose the fragility of being immortal, I suppose, in that. How was that in terms of, did you go with this sort of feeling or gut that you had? Because obviously you probably knew about the character Raiden, but obviously you couldn't really go on the actual previous movies at all.
Well, I mean, of course, I had seen the previous movies because I was a fan, and you know, I used to pretty much only watch movies with martial arts in them for a really long time. So I had seen them, and but with this, yeah, you're right. It was completely different. And, you know, one of the things that was pointed out to me, you know, we had a lot of conversations about me as Raiden, as you can imagine, when they offered me the job. And pitch to me was like, look, he's a god, and he's a god who inhabits mortal bodies. So when he's a god inhabiting a mortal's body, there is some fragility there that he has to be sort of aware of. And you know, there are ground rules and limitations, and what really resonated with me was, again, when he inadvertently connects with Blue, and now, you know, for the first time in a long time, he actually cares for someone. And that was sort of what resonated with me. That's what sort of made that a little bit different. And then also just just the fact that he was just pissed off, you know, like being able to play a really pissed off Raiden was really fun.
I suppose, Ryan, I asked this to everyone so far, and I'm just going to ask for you. If the producers were watching on or looking back at old Mortal Kombat movies or the Mortal Kombat Legacy of the producers and directors of Mortal Kombat 2021, if they kept asking to you, Ryan Robbins, we have this idea for a cameo role for you in terms of Mortal Kombat. It mightn't be Raiden as such, but a sort of a different role. Would that be something as being part of the Mortal Kombat alumni, being part of the history of Mortal Kombat so far? Would that be an interesting uptake for you? Would you definitely say, show me the script and show me what you had in mind first of all, or would it be something that you would probably say, look, I've been there, done that, I've had my turn, or is it something that you would consider?
Oh, I would do it in a heartbeat, but I wouldn't do it as Raiden. To be honest, I think, you know, we've come a long way in this short period of time, and there is some representation that needs to be addressed, and we did talk about things like that when we did the show. You know, historically Asian garb, and it was pitched to me, you know, that you know, well, Raiden's a god, he can inhabit any body he wants. But again, I was really happy to see the casting when they recast for the second season. But to be a part of the Mortal Kombat franchise in another way at another time, of course.
I was just thinking a Striker there, or Colonel Striker or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, Striker would be great. I mean, and you know, I think where I'm at now in my life and my career, that's a great example. And if I could, you know, go toe to toe with some of these guys again in some awesome choreographed fight scenes, it would be a dream come true. That's, you know, that's some of the best times. I love doing that stuff. And, you know, when I get to look back at, you know, the series and I get to see, you know, Darren Shalabi fighting and Michael Jai White fighting and Jerry Ryan fighting and me, and to have me, you know, being seen amongst those legends was a big deal for me. I mean, I grew up on, you know, Michael Jai White action movies, and Darren Shalabi's a legend, you know, bless him. You know, and it was a really, really incredible experience for me. And there was some really funny stories that happened. Actually, there's we had a really, really good time.
And I suppose, Ryan, lastly, in terms of the Mortal Kombat movie that's coming out in 2021, I don't know if you've seen the trailers, but they're going back to the concept of the whole tournament being held in sort of China, in sort of the streets, in terms of the whole original sort of aspect, and fights happening in everyday life sort of scenarios. I see fights in subways, I see fights in sort of stuff like that, choreography, sort of stunts in that. Do you think that's a real sort of daring sort of aspect in terms of, I remember the original Mortal Kombat, it was in an island, and then the second time around it was this made up outworld space sort of world. This time it's very much in the heartland of sort of China, back where the roots and the history of it sort of comes from. Do you think that's going to go down well with the diehard Mortal Kombat fan base?
You never know. You never know with the diehard fan base. You know, everybody's got an opinion, and the opinions differ. Some people are going to love it. Some people maybe not so much. I don't know what the reasoning was, but I personally like it because I think that as an audience, you can put yourself in there. Like, you can put yourself in that subway car. You can put yourself in that street and witnessing this crazy thing happen. And, you know, it's about the battle. It's when these characters meet wherever that is, whether it's, you know, on a floating platform in the middle of nowhere, or whether it's on an island, wherever it is, they must fight. And if they meet on a crowded street, they must fight. And there's something really energetic and visceral about it. And obviously they've got the budget for it, because, you know, that's a big thing, and so much more interesting when there's other obstacles and people, and it becomes more of a almost like a world problem in a sense, you know, with these warriors just are battling each other all over the place. Like, what the hell is going on? And I personally think it's really identifiable for the audience to imagine that scenario rather than these, you know, super special people in a super special place doing super special things. It's kind of interesting to have them just be around you and me, you know.
Yeah, I suppose, Ryan, on that note, it's been a pleasure talking to you today to talk about your time in Mortal Kombat Legacy, for your role as Raiden in Mortal Kombat Legacy. Thanks for sharing your memories, your thoughts on Mortal Kombat. I can see by you, you're definitely a fan, and a fan before you joined, and a fan even to this day. And no doubt you'll be one of the first people with your popcorn and your milkshake and your Maltesers when the new movie arrives at the cinema. And seeing the next take, the 21st century adaptation of Mortal Kombat. Ryan, in this troublesome times, thanks for giving your memories today on your time in Mortal Kombat Legacy, and God bless and take care.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you very much.